I broke out into a big smile as I read the words Bhutanese Tales of the Yeti on the cover. It was a collection of villagers' stories of encounters with the legendary abominable snowman that she had gathered together over the years from across the country and then lovingly edited. I really couldn't think of a more apt gift to receive in a hidden Himalayan valley.
All right, red button over there means record. So I am welcoming Andrew Benfield to the podcast today. How are you?
Thank you very much. I'm very well, thank you.
Well, thanks for coming in. I know you survived Bangkok traffic, so the hard part of your day is done.
Exactly.
Or at least this portion of it. Well, if you don't mind, I'd like to violate the HIPAA standards in America, which is the personal information safety, and ask, you had an injury recently. Are you recovering? You seem...
Yeah, I ripped my shoulder tendon doing Muay Thai boxing, which I think you probably shouldn't do at over age 40. That was the lesson. But I had a very good surgeon, so touch wood, it's all okay now.
Yeah. Was that one-shot deal where you were injured, or was it over time and you just exacerbated it to the point where it needed surgery?
Yeah, I think it was multiple times trying to punch my teacher in the head and not succeeding. And
well done.
that repetitive strain injury of failure.
Well, good. I mean, and that didn't prolong our getting together. It happened when I reached out to you, and it sounded significant. And now that I've had a time to dig into your body of work, I imagine that's completely disorienting to be taken off the grid.
Yeah, I'm a pretty kind of active person. I mean, as you say, I get around Bangkok by motorcycle, for example. So just being immobile and not being able to travel or to exercise, it's not so good for the mental health, I must say.
Yeah. Well, good. Well, good to hear that went well. That can always take several turns. So a good turn is great with surgery. Yeah. So welcome back.
Thank you.
So I really like your website. As an owner of websites, or as a content filler of websites, I'm not even sure if I own them. I'm not even sure how that works. But you just have a great website. And so I'd like to get a little bit of history behind the particular bear name. So if I look up Andrew, I could go on Instagram or other places. But the first day we met, we had dinner or lunch with some friends, and you said, hey, just check out Particular Bear. And I did that, and that was easy to find all of your stuff. Anything behind Particular Bear? PARTICULAR space BEAR, or together, then that's at .com.
We're going to have to get into my childhood, I'm afraid, straight away.
Please do.
So in my family, no one can remember how this started, but my nickname is Winnie the Pooh. My sister is Piglet.
Hey.
My mother is Christopher Robin, and my late father was Eeyore, but we never actually told him he was Eeyore. He was a bit grumpy. So my nickname was Pooh Bear, and I was looking for a name of a website. I liked, I don't know if you've ever read a book called The Tao of Pooh. There's this idea that Pooh was actually a Taoist. I liked his kind of attitude, this kind of innocent discovery. I also liked Paddington Bear, another great British institution. This idea of travel, of exploration. And yeah, I think at one point one of them was described as, being quite particular, a little bit strange, a little bit out from the norm. Neither of those bears would do a 9-to-5 office job. So I thought, I kind of identified with that and thought it sounded cute. And now I'm kind of stuck with it. As you say, I've made Particular Bear publishing. I've got the website, the Instagram.
Sort of deep. Yeah, the Paddington one's a little more posh than the Pooh version, right? So I think you selected, or the originals. We were talking about doppelgangers or names, so I would say the Pooh one's more befitting, and hopefully we'll expose that accurateness over time in the next hour or so. So Particular Bear is where I go to find your information, and if I look at it, I think, or if I look at your Instagram, it's has a couple of words. And they're not hashtags. So there's meditator. There's martial artist. I think I'm going to go without looking at my notes. Travel writer. And so in the fullness of time, there's author, should be on there. It's not on there, I think.
Right.
And then there's radio personality that's not on there. So, I mean, it's not a laundry list, but I could say that it's will probably refresh, and I assume in the next 6 months there'll be even additional titles you'll earn, in particular if you start to, as it's clearly obvious you are, get more attention on social media. There'll be different types of venues to do things and talk. But to me, it was really easy to find. I'm going to keep that live just in case we have debates over what you say or what you didn't on the site. Let's jump back and make the quick bridge to particular bear and those topics. So there's martial arts, there's meditation, there's travel writer. And the reason where I wanted to meet you originally was to talk about your book, The Wrong Way Around, and then less so your new docuseries, if that's what it's called, on BBC Sounds, Yeti. Because when we'd originally talked, it wasn't coming out yet, so we said we'd stay away from that. That's now out, and I'm not saying we're going to go deeply into that because there is some more mystery around that. But born in England?
Born and raised in England, yeah.
Surrey, I had to look that up. I thought Surrey was a coastal town, and it certainly is not.
I'm actually from Essex. No, Surrey is much more fancy.
There you
Essex
go.
is more like, for an American, like the New Jersey of the UK. And I don't mean that in a positive way,
There you go.
But it's actually a lovely part of the world, but very much misrepresented. There's a reality TV series, the equivalent of your Jersey Shore.
Oof.
The Only Way is Essex, and that's kind of tarnished us with it.
So why do I say Surrey? Am I just
I don't
stupid?
know why you say Surrey. Maybe you have another guest lined up straight after me.
No,
who's
one
from
of
Surrey,
your
competitors.
one of your websites,
No, there's no.
or one of the references to you says Surrey.
Maybe I've been hacked.
Damn it. So Essex, that sounds much
Essex,
cooler.
Yes.
Just Surrey, Essex.
100% Essex.
Okay. And so your own disclosure in one of the episodes on the BBC was grew up and had a quick move to boarding school through a scholarship of some type. You obviously that seemed to come up spontaneously, so it didn't seem like a setup. Like, hey, I went to boarding school. There was an analogy you were making to one of your guests, which I thought was awesome, and I want to talk about her. But what was that all about? Or is that, am I in sequence, or have I skipped another major event?
No, there was the birth and then the boarding school. Yeah, so in the UK, the government, I don't know if they still do, but back in the day, you could get a scholarship if you were from a less well-off family to go to one of these fancy boarding schools where you're supposed to get an excellent education. And in many ways, it was a very good education. But yeah, one of the conditions is you have to board. So you sleep at school. So for me, it was age 11, kind of going away, and for 5 years being there, which had quite a big influence on my life, I think, because I felt I didn't fit in. I didn't particularly like not living at home as a child, and I was from a very different kind of background from the other kids there. So
Yeah, meaning your Essex background, or
just being from a different kind of socioeconomic
Right.
status, right? I didn't, having some secondhand clothes, your folks coming to pick you up in not the latest BMW or Mercedes,
Right,
or
okay.
that
Right,
kind
so
of
the
thing.
whole
And
thing.
kids are mean, right? They pick up on this kind of stuff. And also, it was a very sporting school, and back then I was not at all sporty. I wasn't playing, I wasn't a good rugby or cricket player, and those kind of things also kind of isolate you a bit, I think.
yeah, as they should. I mean, I'm not saying should in a normative way, like you're bad, but if you're not out and you can't play, you're going to watch, and if you watch, then you're not part of the team.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah.
So you carry water bottles or do what you can, but then you're the water boy, and then you just get your ass, then you just find encounters, right?
Yeah. I mean, so it's about not fitting in, and I think kids are especially sensitive and pick up on those things, right? If you're the different one, whatever, and that can be tough, and especially when you're 24/7 around that. You don't have a break. I mean, that's the thing about a boarding school. You board, you sleep there, so the whole day, the whole night, you're in that environment, which is can be quite tough. My sister is actually a therapist, and she told me there's a thing called boarding school syndrome. I mean, this is like a diagnosed condition of standard things that people who've been to, not everyone, of course, but many people who've been to boarding school have these kind of, traumas because of it, that are quite particular. When you send a child off to live in an institution and environment at a young age, it's, it can be quite challenging.
Yeah, I mean, I laughed, not at the fact of boarding school syndrome, but I thought back to my first 2 weeks at Camp Richards when I was young, and my mom packed, 2 weeks of clothing or 4 weeks or however I was going, and I remember I wore successfully one pair of underwear and one T-shirt every day. So, it doesn't seem normal, and I'm sure there's a memory of that. It's just right, so.
I can see it in your eyes now. Yeah,
dirty
it's still there.
Don't wash my hair. So the syndrome. Did you have 4 to a room, or were you in a 100 beds to a room? And was it just military style, like they'd come beat you with a bag of lemons to hide the scars?
Lots of lemons. No, the first place I was in, it was I think we were like 8, 9 to a room with the big old kind of the metal beds. I mean, really what you would imagine from a kind of Dickensian type scene. Got slightly better by the time I was like 14. I think then we were 4 to a room or something. Wow. But it's still, kind of cold showers, early morning cross-country runs. That old British tradition of we'll make a real man out of you and you can go and kind of govern the empire or something. I mean, I'm sure it's all changed now, but, that's like 30 years ago. And,
it does. There is something to that, though, as I look at my counterparts in the business world or in the world generally. I was in London last August, and it was hellaciously cold for me. And I was standing next to a guy somewhere, and he had on a shirt and was holding his work, and he had a tie on and no jacket, and I was freezing. And I thought, this guy's tougher than me. I don't even know. We didn't even start the measurement yet of what we're tough in, but he's just tougher. And I thought, some training you Brits do is that just makes you sort of weather ambivalent.
Shorts in the snow. Yeah, exactly.
Which leads to, the wrong way around, and sort of your zeal for jumping into ridiculously dangerous scenarios that you seem to stay on top of, as opposed to just get ripped apart by, which is interesting. I mean, it was just potential geographical failure after geographical failure overcome just by blasting through them sometimes. And it was like, wow, this is crazy stuff. So started early as the education, or no choice, or did you develop sort of the daring do later on? So you leave boarding school to go to where?
So when I left boarding school, I just wanted to actually leave the UK. So I mean, I first got a job in the city of London for an investment bank. After a year, I figured I don't want a Ferrari and a nice suit. I just don't want to be here. So I moved to Israel to live on a kibbutz, like a communal farm. For a year.
What did you do at the investment bank? I mean, how did you qualify to get in there?
They had a kind of fast track program, and somehow I managed to get into that. So I was doing the working on the foreign exchange transactions for them there, training up to be a trader, to be a foreign exchange trader. But after a year, I mean, I went from on a Friday being in the investment bank in London, kind of doing deals, and on the Monday I was in Israel with my hand up a chicken. To be clear, I was working in the kitchens. This was part of the actual job. Making soup. It was a cooking technique. And 100 times happier being in that kind of environment. Yeah.
So I have some dislocation with foreign descriptions of education. So my high school would be roughly 14 to 18 years old, and then my uni would be roughly 18 to 22. Had you completed your uni education yet at that point, or? No,
at that point I was like 19 or something. So I then, got to Israel. I guess I was 20, and had a year of staying there, meeting a lot of people, a bit of soul searching, a lot of reading, read the Bhagavad Gita, read a lot of different books, had a think. and then decided to go back to the UK and get a degree, and thought, I don't know what I want to do in life, but at least, get a degree. That'll probably be handy later on to continue traveling, which is what I knew I wanted to do. And I liked the freedom away from the structure, and particularly the kind of status hierarchy that we have in the UK, and I'm sure that is a product of having been at boarding school, not fitting in, been at the bottom of the pile, and saying, let's just check out of this whole system instead of trying to, compete and prove myself, and let's just go live somewhere else and be the outsider. And that was just a more comfortable place for me to be.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm using some of your words or not. Forex trader is sort of, on some level, leading edge of the money machinery, right? How did you pick that? I mean, did someone say, hey, you're going to be successful, son, you must be a foreign trader?
Yeah, I mean, when I was young, it was like, well, surely the point of work is to make money. That was my idea then. What is the career that makes you the most money? It's in finance, it's in FX or futures or swaps or something like that. So that is the logical thing to do. You get yourself a job in an investment bank, and that's it. So, I did what I thought was necessary to be happy. But after a year, I saw these guys and, men and women with all the trappings who'd got already where I wanted to go. And they didn't seem happy, and they didn't seem to be the kind of people I wanted to be like.
None of them?
I mean, one should never say it, none of them. I mean, that's a very sweeping statement. I didn't meet any. I didn't meet any happy bankers.
Well, and you probably met the folks in your trajectory, right? So the boss and his assistants.
I mean, maybe some of the higher ups, or I'm sure some other people get satisfaction from it. But for me, I mean, also that daily commute, getting on the train every day, going to London with the same people.
What was your commute?
So at that time, I would get on my bicycle in my village, the lovely village of Rain, like 2,000 people. Bicycle, a couple of miles to the train station, get an hour on the train to London, then walk to the bank, and then do that again in the evening. And, your whole day is gone, right? And then your whole week is gone just with that. And that also seemed to me that wasn't the way I wanted to live, especially if during that 9 to 5 when I'm at work, I'm not particularly enjoying it, or hanging out with people I like, or doing something satisfying. So,
what was your train ride like? Were those the moments of repose in the week where there was an iPhone, probably there wasn't good data on small things, so you were carrying hardbound objects or other reading material? Were you a reader? Were you a music listener? What were you doing with it? Or were you reading Forex reports?
I wasn't reading Forex reports. I think I was reading books, looking out of the window at the English countryside, looking around the carriage at other people, and just kind of thinking, do you want this to be your life for the next 30 years? And every day, the answer no was kind of getting louder in my head.
Yeah, interesting. And I'm not saying one way or the other if this is the right choice or the wrong choice. It's just it's consistent. Yeah, we can see it as we go through. So in touch with the parents or a custodian at that point, or are you pretty much doing all of this on your own and floating freely around the world with no one following your tracks?
I mean, my parents divorced just when I left boarding school. So basically at 16, I found that legally I could not be compelled to stay there. So I quit. No, I mean, my parents had the best of intentions to get me a very good education, and I was getting it basically for free. Fantastic. But I wasn't happy there. So I said at that point, I'm leaving. So that was a big change, because I went from a very fancy, haiso, as we'd say in Thailand, very posh boarding school, to my local school instead, which was very not posh, in Essex. And at the same time, my parents got divorced. My father moved out. So that was quite a rupture in life, I think. And the two big anchors of stability, which had been the institution I'd lived in for 5 years, and the parents were suddenly gone. And I was then, kind of young, wild and free, and making my own decisions then. And
I mean, going home might have been more restrictive, right?
I mean, it wasn't because of the divorce, to be honest.
Right.
So once you're, for people who've been through that, I think it's often the case. you have that parental unit. If you have, if you live with two parents who kind of control you, tell you what to do, you look up to them, then when they separate, I mean, the kind of power somehow went, and I was just like, well, I can now kind of do what I want. That force is no longer there.
I'm guessing first motorcycle rider on then?
So I'm actually a lot less brave and daring do, etc. than you make me out. So I always wanted to ride a motorbike. It took me until age 30 until I was brave enough to try. And then very stupidly, where did I decide to learn was New Delhi in India, which for those of you who've been, it's not the most easy place, let's say, to drive. So yeah.
Okay, good. So I think I'm back on track with sort of watching this. Israel, you mentioned, seems to be the first significant off-ramp or on-ramp, depending on how you look at this. Internship, chef apprentice, just washing dishes to make some dough, nothing.
In Israel, yeah. I mean, I was working in the kitchens. It's less of a tradition now, but back in the day, you'd have young people from all around the world who'd go to Israel and live on one of these kibbutz, these communal farms, and you can basically live for free. You work and you have a place to stay, you have food to eat. There's a lovely atmosphere because you're in this very kind of international community, and you can stay as long as you like. So it's full of kind of hippies and misfits from all over, basically.
Defining or just another stop along the way?
No, for sure. I mean, to be away from my country for a year in a completely different culture, also in a country where there is a fair degree of conflict, it would be fair to say. Growing up in the UK, you didn't have that. In Israel, when at the top of the hour, everyone turns the radio up to hear the news to see if there's been a bombing or a shooting or an attack. And at that time, I mean, this was a very regular occurrence. Be out in Tel Aviv on the way back, there's been a bomb, a bus you've been on last week has been blown up. I live right on the border of the West Bank. So there would be very regular kind of outbreaks of violence around. And very interesting to live, in an area where you have this historical conflict. And I mean, my experience there was very much on the Israeli side because I lived in a kibbutz with a bunch of Israelis. Funnily enough, my sister was living in Berlin in Germany at the time. And when I left the kibbutz, I went to see her. And her flatmate was a Palestinian who lived in the town right next to my kibbutz. And when I was in the kibbutz, that town was kind of, the no-go area and, don't go there, it's full of terrorists. Met this guy when I got to Germany, nicest guy in the world, and suddenly opened my mind to this fact that I'd had quite a one-sided view of what was going on there. And so then I went and studied Middle East politics at university as a product of that. So, yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Middle East politics as a sort of, I'm going to use an American term, is it like an undergraduate major or as a specialty?
Yeah, an undergraduate major, and then with languages as well.
Nice.
Yeah. I mean, by that time I knew I wanted to stay overseas. That was where I was happy. And I thought, well, you need languages and, doing some kind of international relations type thing is probably useful. So.
Yeah, and so if a man from Essex says, by that time I knew I wanted to go overseas, is the default mechanism for a boy who went to boarding school from a young age to a point in time where he was emancipated, 16, I just learned, is the good old British government a reliable source to go out and go overseas? Because I would imagine from the 1850s to now, the Commonwealth provided a lot of overseas options.
Yeah, I mean, that was my idea, to be a diplomat. So, I mean, I applied to a scheme. They have called a fast stream thing. So very, very tough examinations. I mean, the most thorough kind of testing over several months, like interviews, written tests, group work, even, I mean, they don't tell you this, but a good cop, bad cop thing. You have one interview and there's a lovely, charming lady who comes in and you tell her everything because she's so lovely. It's about your childhood and you open everything. And then you have another one, and again, they don't tell you, with a completely nasty man who comes in and just everything you say is looking at you like, what what a ridiculous thing to say. And you're there, and only afterwards you realize, oh, this is a setup to test how you do, how you do under pressure, what secrets you'll give away. So I went through all that. I got to kind of the final stages. I got shortlisted, didn't get in, was kind of devastated because I'd given a year of my life to that.
But that was for fast track. Was there a slow track?
There was a slow track, but by that time I'd moved to Brussels in Belgium and was working for a kind of not the British Embassy, but different British regions have their own mini embassies in Brussels to represent their interests with the European Union, get funding. So I worked for one of them. So I was doing a kind of, a mini version of diplomacy. Yeah. And then I thought, well, the European Union, I could work for them. At the time, the UK, this was pre-Brexit, was still in Europe. So I then thought, well, this will be a good thing to do. I can go and work for the European Union instead in different countries. Which is what I did, and then of course Brexit happened, and it was like, oh my God, like this is not good. This was not a good career choice.
It's funny. I don't. I get the significance of Brexit. I get that. I don't view it as destabilizing from a world order point of view. I mean, and I don't view the partnership between the UK and, if I'm even saying that correctly, between England and the United States is having changed at all. I know there's complexities that both sides would rather not have had to address. So, but I could see that from your point of view. Like, oh no, the latitude and the multitude of things I could have done.
Yeah, I mean, from a very simple, practical point, by that time I was working as a freelance consultant. So European Union embassies in the country, different countries would hire me and say, hey, can you come to Paraguay for 2 weeks and do this or that? Or, can you come to Myanmar? And then it was suddenly like, I'm going to be ineligible to do this because I'm no longer a European in the sense of we're no longer an EU member state. I mean, it didn't happen like that. I'm not sure what the situation is now, but it was, at the time it was like I've just been disqualified from my own career halfway through it, kind of thing, right? It's as if someone took away my ability to write or to speak English. I mean, one of the basic qualifications was being a European, being a member of the EU, and then suddenly it was gone.
Well, I guess we see that all the time, right? With Russia and the Ukraine, and in the past with Russia, and in the past with Cuba, and in the past with whoever the enemy of the day is. It's career trajectories can change. What were you advising on, or what were you being asked to? Were you the English dude, or was it with a specialty in the training from the school?
I didn't have that on my business card. Andrew Benfield, the English dude.
Particular bear,
yes. My specialty was how to make development cooperation work better. So in plain English, people like the European Union, also the UN, the World Bank, USAID give money to other countries to support things like health, education, roads, good governance, this kind of thing. And my job was, well, how can we make that assistance work a little bit better? One of the things, for example, is they often don't listen enough or understand enough the local context. The classic one is we go in, we build some wells in villages, people can get drinking water, but there's no technicians to maintain them, and you can't get the spare parts, for the pump in the country, and so it's not sustainable. So it was going around looking at those things, a lot of common sense stuff. By that time I got an MBA as well, a master's of degree in business administration. So I was trying to come in with a more, let's say, private sector business-like approach, with these big lumbering bureaucracies, and say, well, how can we do business a little bit better and make this work more efficiently, effectively?
I think that will be an always needed skill. As long as there's such a gap between country 1 and country 182, or however many there are, 212. I mean, there's such a huge gap in implementing, the iPhone in 182 is harder than in 1, right? It's simple things, but you're speaking about a theme that I've thought a lot about, because I've been involved in projects that have been launched overseas, and even doing my work here in Thailand. I know you're over in Singapore, but just doing my setup here, you have to have a certain awareness.
And the thing is, if you're selling a product, if you're doing a good job or not because people buy it or they don't buy it. If it's a terrible product, you go bankrupt. in international development, it's very different. The people paying for the product are, say, the American taxpayer. The people consuming the product may be a Sudanese villager. So, and they don't have a choice. It's just kind of given to them, and they don't get the chance to feed back to the person paying for it and saying, hey, thanks for the well, but it's not actually working. Could we have a road instead? So there's a lack of a kind of feedback mechanism. Also, that Sudanese villager doesn't elect the American government. So, you don't have the kind of democratic check and you don't have the market check, which means things can go awry. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's such, I'm extremely interested in the grid in the EU, the energy grid, how solid that is becoming. For example, in my thinking, France with nuclear is a net exporter of energy, right? It makes more than it consumes and can sell. You can't just throw energy or nuclear energy over a wall, so it has to get into a system that makes it transferable, and someone has to be able to catch it. Yeah, they figured that out for years. Can we do that from Laos to Thailand? Slightly different model, and so you have so many things, and just having that expertise and being able to go around the world, Peter Pan style or not, but having it and being able to go around and talk about it is such a huge thing. And it's, is it Machiavellian or some other word to say it's, what that means to be the deliverer of that news, I don't know, but it's a big deal, and if you can, especially if you can clearly communicate that stuff, it seems huge. And so I think your generation, or my generation, our generation, or your generation, you were in that mode where Brexit was coming, but pre-Brexit, now that you sit here and describe it, I'm thinking there must have been huge, great opportunities. It almost must have been a heyday, like for foreign diplomacy, right? And just tremendous amounts of money going to EU, going to Asia, going everywhere for big projects that we're now living in. Just massive highway networks in Asia, China, that were started probably at the beginning of that part of your career. Yeah,
now of course it's changing, especially in Asia. There's a lot more money coming from China. There's a Belt and Road Initiative, this kind of thing. So things are looking quite different now. But the interesting point you just made, I mean, something like Brexit, any big disruptive, let's be neutral, disruptive event brings opportunities as well as challenges. And from a personal level, it kind of made me think, is it time to do something else as well? Should I start writing? Should I start traveling? Should I start doing something else? So, I mean, there was a silver lining as well, I think, for me, that it made me get up and say, right, what are we doing with the rest of the life now? If this nice career is in jeopardy.
Yeah. Okay. So, Forex passed on that. Kibbutzing was good. You get back, you get the degree. It's a political sort of international focus. You do some work. You get to Brussels at least, and you move around, and then there's a trip to Africa that's next.
So what happened was I'm working in Brussels. Happy to be out of the UK, but it's a bit bureaucratic. It's not really what I want to do. And my boss of the time, James, moved to Madagascar randomly after that to do development work. So I sent him an email that kind of a couple of weeks before my contract in Brussels was ending. He'd already moved there and jokingly said, any chance of a job in Madagascar? And he said, come on down. So I did, and I moved from Belgium to Madagascar and went and worked for an NGO there who were teaching people how to grow rice more productively, which I didn't know a lot about, and that was my first introduction into this world where you'd often, as the foreign expert, get thrown in, and I don't have expertise on how Malagasy rice yields can be improved. I mean, I tried to learn very quickly and use my brain a bit, but it's, you're parachuted in as the kind of foreign expert because you're from overseas and you're with an organization that has some money. And that was quite galling to me. And I come back to that if we talk about Yetis. It's that kind of ignoring local knowledge, not taking it seriously enough, and the kind of the outsider knows better phenomena. Can't possibly be a Yeti.
Yeah, I mean,
there is a link. Random as it may sound.
Is it Kunzag Choden? I mean, I think...
Kunzag Choden, yeah.
Right, I think that... I didn't realize how a lot of this must be tying up for you, things that your discovery is leading to. But yeah, we'll definitely get back to that, because as you described it, I was like, well, she spoke pretty well on exactly what that, help from outside does. It wants to have a physical example, and perhaps there isn't one. Or yeah, well, good. So, wow, Madagascar. I mean, that's you've already been to several spots, that aren't first choices for travelers. It's not a weekend in New York City or something. It's Israel, and then back to the cultural center, the political cultural center of Europe, to Brussels, which is, requires some money and some space to move around, and then you go to Madagascar. One bag or a backpack, or nothing at all in your pockets, or
no, it was pretty much a backpack situation. I mean, I'd done a summer teaching English in the Sudan, just to add to the randomness. Before that, so that was my first Africa experience. Loved that, but yeah, I mean, again, this thing, countering the daring do narrative. I mean, I was petrified when I flew to Madagascar. I got off the 11-hour flight from Paris and didn't want to get off the plane. Same thing happened when I moved to Sudan to teach English before that. It was like, I'm not, I'll just stay on. Maybe I'll cower down behind the seat, and maybe, they'll just take me back to Paris and not notice it. And, you're getting off the plane in a completely alien environment. The sounds, the smells, the sights, everything overwhelming. But normally, I now know from experience, after 2-3 days, I'm loving it. I'm enjoying the stimulation. That's what we all crave. I mean, that's what the brain gets stimulated by, is difference, right? It's something out of the normal. Different culture, different people. But yeah, I'm normally quaking for the first 48 hours, and that was definitely the case in Antananarivo.
Yeah, there was in the Yeti series, when your credentials were with the driver and you guys were flying to a remote space that required special government approval. Do you have those same moments now, where like you're landing at this remote spot that you're sort of on your own? Do you say, God, is this another one of these? And does it take a day of getting used to, or are you now sort of used to your own desire to put yourself in spots that are impossible, or hard?
I think it can go both ways. So, last time I was stopped by the police in Thailand, and I should stress I was doing nothing actually wrong. There's less nerves. It's like, I've been in this situation before. I'm in a country that's not my own. I'm being stopped. I speak some Thai, but not enough for a fluent conversation with the police. But it's like, there's a little bit of adrenaline, but it's like, okay, we'll deal with it. We'll see what the problem is. The counter to that is, I think, when you've had a lot of experiences where bad stuff has happened, you kind of know it can. So you will think back to, this reminds me of, when I was in Bolivia and that guy pulled a gun at me or whatever, and maybe that's going to happen now. So it can work a bit both ways. But I think generally you have a sense that, it's not don't go to the whole country generally. It's go there, speak to local people, see what's safe. When you go around, if you can, go with someone who's from the region. Keep checking. Don't walk down narrow alleys at night. So it's not that the whole country or area is out of bounds normally. It's just you go in with a certain sense of what's sensible. And a friend of mine was traveling here last week, and they managed to get kind of ripped off 3 times in 2 days. And I just thought, that never happens to me. And you just think, looking at him and how he kind of acts and behaves, and you see that, when you've got kind of predatory criminals, I mean, they look for that, right? They spot the backpacker who's just off the plane, who's not kind of savvy and whatever. So I think you do build up some experience, and maybe just a look, and the way you react to people, that when someone says, would you like to come to my gold shop? You're
right,
like, I'm good, thank you. Or like, your hotel's been closed down, but luckily my cousin has a place around the corner. You say, no, I don't think that's probably true.
Yeah, that's interesting. And so It's not the Jubilee line that just keeps you going, so you can't stay on the plane in Madagascar. What's the name of the airport you landed at?
So Madagascar has fantastically long names for cities and people. I always wonder how they manage filling in immigration forms when they travel overseas. So it's Antananarivo is the capital city. Yeah.
So that's where you landed.
So I landed in Antananarivo. Yeah.
And you got out.
I got out.
Your backpack.
I got my backpack. Luckily, I was staying with my ex-boss, who was again my boss, with a very different job. And traveled around Madagascar.
Palatial accommodations, housekeeper, driver, or
no, there wasn't. It was like a compound, and actually, they worked for the Adventist Development Relief Agency. I'm not an Adventist, so it was a little bit of a special, mainly kind of Americans, Adventists.
Of course.
So quite a distinct culture in the compound where I live. So I tended to then go out on a Friday because they didn't drink alcohol, for example, and I would kind of go out on the town to kind of interesting bars around Antananarivo, kind of roll in, early in the morning. So it was a semi-boarding school experience in a way, because I was back in a little bit of an institution and on a compound, and then I would go out on the weekends and kind of, do all the things that the Adventists said you shouldn't, kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, interesting. And so is the environment tropical, and is it Singapore-like to give you a?
Yeah, as quite a few years ago now, but yeah, pretty tropical. I mean, Madagascar is an interesting place because the people there will tell you their ancestors are Asian, not African. That they came across on the sea, and you have rice terraces, for example. The landscape, the countryside looks very different from the rest of Africa and looks kind of quite Asian in some ways. And you have a lot of flora and fauna you find nowhere else in the world. I mean, it's this big island off the east coast of Africa where, plants, animals evolved independently of anywhere else, basically in isolation. So you've had all these interesting kind of metamorphoses into langurs and different kinds of trees that you don't find anywhere else. So it's a fascinating place and culture.
And so does the Adventist crew that you're with, and if crew is pejorative, I didn't mean it to be, but if the folks in the Adventist charity or association you work with, did some of them have rice experience that they're departing to you or
I think a lot of them were learning on the job. I think it's fair to say none of them had grown up cultivating rice in, Wisconsin or wherever they were from. That did kind of jar a little bit. I mean, the other thing was why we were promoting rice cultivation was because we had money from a donor. I don't remember who it was. It may have been the UN or one of the big international investment banks. That was what there was money available for. And therefore, it's like we've got a hammer, so we're looking for nails. Yeah. And I remember very clearly speaking to some local villagers, and they said, look, we're growing enough rice and we can grow vegetables. What we don't have is a decent road. You came here today in a 4x4, and how long did that take you? I was like, it took us about 7 hours. It was very bumpy,
Right.
Look, what we need is a road.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we've not got money for a road, so what we're going to do is,
give you more rice.
Increase rice productivity. And they're like, but we have enough to eat. We can't get it to the market to sell because there's no road.
Yeah.
Okay. There's something up here. There's a gap in the kind of feedback loop. Again, there's not this market mechanism. We're not giving the solution that's needed here.
Or you're getting played again, or it's truthful. Hey, we got too much. Yeah, I mean, the multitude of responses is amazing. But I feel your pain and confusion at that moment, trying to figure out if the road you've taken is the appropriate one there. But enjoyable living there.
Yeah, I mean, it was a great experience. Again, amazing island, and to travel around. I'd hitchhike or I'd take a local bus, whatever. I mean, I didn't have any money at the time. I mean, great experiences. Yeah.
I'd say most of my travels lead me to a conclusion that the education that I thought I had as being broad and comprehensive was broad and comprehensive, but did not include significant things like the nature of East Africa, Madagascar, and just how amazingly complex that whole scenario is down there. And just as you travel from South Africa, Tanzania, just Kenya, it's just how complicated and how beautiful all of the mixing up of things over the last thousands of years has been. And you get to, you're like, wow, I had no idea this was even here. And it's just,
Yeah.
right? So like,
There's so much out there.
where
Absolutely.
was that, right? Isn't that maybe what the woman said again? Is there's a lot of unexplored stuff still. Yeah.
It really is, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, is the travel bug now firmly in you after that trip?
Yeah, I think by then it was, this is what I want to do. So then I managed to, then I went to Hong Kong. By that time I'd started to study traditional Tai Chi, actually as a martial art. So most people these days study it as a health system, and there's few people who know it as a martial art. And my teacher's teacher was an ex-cop in Hong Kong, and he trained there. So I went out to Hong Kong and found a teacher and did some training there for a bit.
I have a note of his name from one of your, maybe it's on your website, I forget, and I'm going to try and fool around and look for it as opposed to ask you. I want to look to it so I can show you I'm smart and well-studied, but I can't read my own writing. And the reason why I wanted to do that is it's a complicated history, because Tai Chi, as I see it when I drive down the street in Shanghai or Chengdu or Beijing and see people doing the movement thing, is part of what you're talking about. Then you add a word onto it and it becomes that elaborate dance style with then some actual contact components, and it's Chuan, Tai Chi Chuan?
Tai Chi Chuan, so that's the full name, and Chuan means fist or fighting system.
Right.
So, I mean, what you've got there is basically a series of fighting moves that were then put together, slowed down to practice them well. In the same way a boxer will do shadow boxing, slow down the movements, get everything right. Over time, also with the Cultural Revolution in China, a lot of the real martial arts were pushed out to Taiwan, to Hong Kong. They were a threat to the state. So we got the development of more artistic gymnastic forms, but not stuff you could actually use for fighting and self-defense.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah. So, if you're doing Tai Chi and you don't know what you're doing, I mean, every move is a self-defense move. That's, that's it. So the first move, the form, your arms raise up. I mean, you speed this up to block someone coming in to grab you, for example. So if you just do the slow stuff, you get a nice workout. It's good for circulation, stretching, etc. But you're missing really what you're, the true origin of what you're doing. So
Cheng
Chen Hung
is
he's
did you meet him?
He was very, very old and a bit sick by that time. Although I was with my teacher at the time. So Chen Hung he was known as the Tai Chi bodyguard in Hong Kong. He once won one of the first mixed martial arts contests. He beat the Taiwanese heavyweight boxing champion in the 50s.
Jesus.
He was known as the Tai Chi bodyguard because he would go to the parks in Hong Kong, and there a lot of people were just doing the slow Tai Chi, and the other Kung Fu stylist practitioners would see these guys and say, oh, you're not proper martial artists, and go and beat them up. So when Chen Hung heard about this, he would go down there and do his Tai Chi in the morning. When they came to him, he would speed it up and kind of give them a lesson. And he trained a bunch of full contact fighters who were successful across Southeast Asia in the kind of 70s, 80s, using Tai Chi against every other style. So he was a particular man. Yeah.
And then his student was an Englishman, or
a Scottish guy called Dan Doherty, who was a vice cop in Hong Kong. Basically moved there because he was already a karate black belt, wanted to study more martial arts, so he got a job as a policeman in Hong Kong. Met the Grandmaster Chen Hung. I think Chen Hung kind of put him down with 2 moves on meeting him, no worries, and Dan said, okay, this is the real deal. And then he trained with him, and then kind of brought the art back to Europe as a martial art, and then taught for many years. He died a couple of years back, unfortunately, but he really put it across Europe and further afield. And I would say, as the really the last school teaching it as a martial art, this was something that was very nearly kind of lost and had just become a dance.
Interesting, right? Because of a political movement. You think about that, right? It just spins off its axis because the home of it has got a new outlook. It's like,
I'd hate to think the amount of learning and skills that have been lost in history because of,
or held on to
crackdowns, but the amount of, libraries that have been burnt and skills that have been suppressed because they were seen to represent a threat to the ruling group. It's
global warming. Yeah. I was laughing. Frank and I have a song called People's Park. I got waylaid in Shanghai for a bit and was walking through the People's Park one day, and I saw the inevitable display where the oldest dude with a pocket protector and glasses and pens was taking all of the young wannabes to task in the, I couldn't even tell, in the martial arts ring. And it was some of the most aggressive, quick, fast encounters between two people I've ever seen. I was like, what in the world is this corner of this park? And as you walked around that park, you could do your whole thing. There's badminton, two old ladies who would probably beat me 15-0 or whatever the score for badminton is. Just, but that really struck me as an interesting thing. And so we have a song called People's Park. But as you sat there and described this sort of, took them out in two strokes, the clichéness of that is huge, but it's not a cliche when one's the grandmaster handing over his skills to the number two, and it keeps the bloodline going, and then you're number 3 or number 100 or whatever you are, but you're one of the few and the proud, right? And so you have this thing that you now disseminate. And so when we go back to what your titles are, we get travel writer. We got meditator. We haven't talked about yet, martial artist. And so here it is. And so was this in the 90s?
I think then we're into the 2000s by then.
Yeah.
You're talking about People's Park, just, for people who've not been in China or Hong Kong, you walk around a park in the morning and see the different exercises or martial arts. Often you're not sure that people are doing. Phenomenal. There are people doing ballroom dancing. There are people walking backwards and clapping. There are people who you think, maybe they have some issues, or maybe this is some esoteric, wellness system they're practicing. It's delightful, right? Or there's someone playing the violin. It's not like in Europe or the States, it'll just be a few people walking their dog. It's eclectic at the very least.
I always attribute it to thin walls at home. Get out, right? But like the muscle slappers are definitely an Asiatic.
People just slapping themselves in the face.
Just getting the blood flowing, I guess, from a cold night.
In Hong Kong, we train at the weekend, so that if you've been to Hong Kong, some of the tower blocks, full of tower blocks, right? You've got a very dense population.
A tower block could be a large building on one of the hills.
Yeah, and some of them, there'll be, say, four of these skyscrapers. And on, say, the 20th floor, there'll be a kind of plaza that joins the 4 towers. So a lot of them have this. So you've got this outdoor area where, again, thin walls, that's where you go down to train. And we'd go there, and there'd be, a lot of them are taken over by martial artists at the weekend. There'd be 70, 80-year-old guys with spears, with maces, with axes, like jumping around. And I'd be there training with my teacher, and, guys would come out and say, I can see you've been training with Chen Ting Hung or whatever. It was, like a 70s kung fu movie or something. But this was still happening. This is 20 years ago now, but it was amazing.
No different than if I'm hitting a backhand on the clay courts at Central Park and someone would say, hey, you're hitting a Nadal shot, right? It's just,
I'm sure it happens all the time, yeah.
Or you're kicking, you're clicking like Wayne Rooney, it's just, but Hong Kong's going to be the axe swinger, right? That's a good observation, and it's clearly what you're very good at seeing and then communicating. So, all right, so you're now, you have this thing, and out of that comes meditation or not?
The meditation, I think, came from yeah, I tried the banking thing. That's let's say the materialism. Then I was trying the traveling thing, and that was definitely making me more happy. But finally, I realized, whatever I do, it's my own brain that's really causing my happiness or unhappiness. And I think that happened. Fast forward a few years, I bought a house in Bali. I moved to Bali, and I had a lovely place, and I was sitting by my swimming pool, looking over the jungle and the mountains with a gin and tonic. And I still wasn't content. I was like, what is wrong with you? You have everything you're supposed to want. And that set me on a bit of a journey to thinking, to reading, to cogitating a little bit about it, and thinking, actually, it's, maybe it is the internal that's as important. And then those things kind of came together a little bit, that it is, a mix of body and mind, exploring and stimulating both through the travel, through the martial arts, through the meditation, that I think is the key to a kind of fulfilled and if not happy, at least kind of satisfied.
Yeah.
Life.
So the boarding school was not a physical, a place where you figured out how to throw your fast pitch or throw a googly or whatever the corollary is for your thing. So
for throwing a googly, I think, yes, as cricketers, yes. No, I didn't. I was no good with my googlies at boarding school.
So you then meet a dance art that turns into a dance defensive martial art. Are you talented? Are you physical? Are you good at it? Or is your teacher saying, God, Andrew, you've never done any, what's wrong with you? You're
Just
so uncoordinated.
Hard work, yeah. Uncoordinated, and simply, good lesson there. I think my teacher originally said, you're the most uncoordinated person, I've ever seen. And I always say that to my students now if they're having trouble with a movement, it's
just positive reinforcement for them.
You've just got to keep at it.
I mean, you don't say you're the most uncoordinated person.
No, I don't. I say my teacher said that to me. Maybe they think that I'm by extension, I'm saying it to them.
Yeah.
But Kung Fu actually means, people think Kung Fu is a martial art. Kung Fu means the path of achievement through hard work. And, there's this strong Chinese philosophy that journey of 1,000 miles starts with one step. You've just got to hammer away. I mean, not mindlessly, but you've got to put in the work. You've got to put in the 10,000 hours. And I mean, with anything, I'm a much poorer guitar player than you, but I mean, it's daily practice for years before I would get up and go and sing, in public and do that. And people say, you do that nicely. How do you remember all those songs? It's like, well, because I do it every day for an hour, there's no magic. I mean, there is magic if you do it every day in an hour, because then people are like, you can now do something I can't do. That's great. But I mean, there's definitely no skill from my part, I would say, that's innate for any of the things I do. It's simply, hard work, and then probably insecurity at not being good enough. So, which pushes you to, right, I better put in some more hours then. Otherwise people will laugh. Yeah.
And so if I look at the website, then Particular Bear, I can see, which is really, you have great video montages. So it's, I like the work you put on there. It's just, I think it's worth taking a look at the website just to see how pretty some of the shots are. Now I'm starting to understand a little bit. Many of them are obviously from your Yeti series and some of that footage, but there's other stuff, and there's photos of you doing your martial art. And the meditation, of which you now offer training in both in Singapore or wherever you're at. So Hong Kong, are you doing any work in the Brussels style?
No, I went there. I quit the job went out there learning Tai Chi Chuan 50% of the day, and the other 50% of the day I decided to study for my master's degree in business administration. So it was quite yin and yang, actually, with two very contrary activities. In the morning I'm in the park with a sword or whatever, and in the afternoon, I'm learning about net present value and how to manage international supply chains. So it was actually quite a nice combination. Yeah.
You liked it?
Yeah, I like the mix. I think that's good. Yeah.
Under your own measure of value you weren't selling out, or was this a backstop, some security?
It's a backstop, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I was always, a friend once said, I think it was when I was in Israel, about you keep, whenever you're making a decision, always think about keeping the options open for future. However sure you think you are, don't close off roads. And I thought, having, studying business would set me up for doing whatever. It turned out that I didn't go into business. I went instead into this international development. But then they were like, oh, you've got a master's degree in business administration. You must be a very, kind of efficient and effective person. That's what we need in our bureaucracy here. And so it worked a treat because no one else had that qualification in that world. Everyone had studied international relations or, that kind of thing. It kind of worked out well. Yeah.
So you're back in the game though, right?
So after that, I was back in the game. I got a job with the European Union and then got my dream offer to go out to India and work for their embassy in India. And then it was like, right, game on now. I'm doing the, not diplomacy, but I'm in this international development world. I'm working for an embassy. And I knew after that I'd be able to, what is the word you use in American? Is it parlay it into something else? Is that the right thing? Like, you've got that and that experience. I will piggyback on that to get somewhere else. So from there, I then became an advisor to them in Ethiopia and then moved kind of all over. And it was like, okay, this is great. I've got my ticket now. I'm doing something quite interesting. I can move around the world, and it was all good.
Yeah, I think we borrowed that from Johnny Depp. Let's parlay it. So if you had gotten on the fast track way back when, that's the track you would have hopefully been on in another city, in another place, similar style. Probably couldn't have because you didn't have the degree to bolster that. But
I would have been trapped if I'd been in the British diplomatic service because when you're a straight full-on diplomat, you're really representing your country. You don't have absolute free choice of where you get stationed. Yeah. When you're there, you have a lot of engagement you've got to do every day. In the evenings, this kind of thing. Of course, you've got to be on message the whole time. And I realized I was much better suited to go and give advice to people in a kind of freestyling way and choose where I went, and that it didn't take over my life. And I think that's something from boarding school as well, a very independent, individualistic streak. I wouldn't have fit well stuck in to a job where you're 24/7. You're a diplomat, right? I mean, you're representing your country, even if you're out for a drink in the evening or you're traveling, you're on downtime. I mean, you are a representative the whole time. And I think not that I'm terribly debauched or irresponsible, but I think that's a lot of pressure.
Yeah. No, I get it. I don't put a judgment on that description. It is what it is. It's so where in India? You didn't name a specific location. Maybe?
I was based in Delhi.
Okay. Yeah. Which okay, great. So then you're no longer there.
I'm no longer there. Okay. So I had the job working for the European Union's embassy there, and I realized the more interesting thing was I was in my office in the embassy pushing paper most of the day. And it's like, why put me in the embassy if I'm not out, in the streets of India doing things? We were actually hiring consultants to do all of the work and go out and do the interesting stuff. And, paying them quite good money. And I thought, why don't I become one of them? And I was reading these people's reports and stuff, seeing their work. And I thought, I think I could actually do that. I quit and then got a job doing that in Ethiopia and East Africa, and then that's what I did the next 10 years or so, just move around the world and give people advice. Yeah.
So you do supply chain assessments or what?
No, so that was very much on the how to make your development programs work better. So, go into wherever it may be,
Let's use Ethiopia, for example.
Okay, so in Ethiopia, it was like, okay, we have several different European countries here working together. You're doing some road building, you're helping agricultural productivity. How can we work better together, better with the government, spend this money more efficiently, more effectively?
And was yours a British point of view? Were those your purchasers of your services? Or
no, I mean, I was employed by the European Union.
Oh, okay, right.
So the nice thing was because I'd been, as we say, in the house before, you're a safe pair of hands. Yeah. He's one of us. He's worked for us in the house.
Yeah.
So he's not going to do anything crazy. He knows how we work. He knows the style.
Interesting. Okay. So you bounce around project to project?
Yeah, I mean, I got a long-term, the first one I wanted it to be long-term to get some financial security in Ethiopia. Then I went to Georgia, not Georgia on my mind, but Georgia Tbilisi. Then Namibia, then Nepal. So kind
Nice.
of moving around. Yeah.
Okay. And then you stopped doing that?
I ended up in Myanmar for a 2-week consultancy that turned into 6 years, just loved Myanmar.
Yeah.
Interesting country. It was a fascinating time. At that point, it was all hope. Got there in 2012-13. Then Aung San Suu Kyi came to power 2015. Of course, very sadly, in the last couple of years, that's all changed. By that time, I was doing some investing as well, and wrote a book and thought maybe what I really want to do, this constant theme, what I really want to do is something with travel and communicating, but, I was into the meditation as well. So it's like, could there be, people love talking about the intersection of things these days, right? It's I'm at the intersection of this and this. So I guess my intersection was, of kind of exploring the world, but the mind at the same time. Yeah. What makes people happy? A kind of a thoughtful travel and exploration of the world, and how people live, kind of celebrating that, but in a slightly deeper way than the normal. Like, oh look, they this and they dress like this. I mean, what's going on in people's minds? How do they live? How do they try and be happy? And that's so until I decide that's also not the thing. That's what I'm doing for now.
Yeah, and I know you don't. You and I are fans of Lonely Planet or any tour guide as a kickoff, but I get what you're saying there. And so I feel like we can cue up the primary objectives here now is I got this book of yours and I thought, this guy's insane. Yeah, it's just starting off this... And I'd met you, and I thought he didn't seem insane. But now that I've read the book,
chap.
He's got to be out of his mind. So the wrong way around. I'm not sure if Star Wars guy Ian.
Yes, this is a blatant ripoff of Ewan McGregor and Charlie Borman's The Long Way Round when they ride motorcycles around the world. And I was trying to think of a name for my book, which is also about a motorcycle journey. And a friend of mine who's actually used to work for Ogilvy, very good at marketing and stuff, just, came up, just spat it out and said, how about The Wrong Way Round? Because, the trip was a bit of a disaster. So instead of The Long Way Round, yours can be The Wrong Way Round. And it was like, yeah, that's, and then the subtitle is How Not to Travel to Burma by Motorcycle. So it's a how not to guide.
So particular Bear Publishing Company?
Yeah, I first published with a publisher. I know you've done books as well, and that's incredibly painful unless you're extremely good. I mean, it takes a long time to get a publisher, and these days the margins are very low. Yeah. So after a year after it was out, I just wasn't happy. So I looked into self-publishing and discovered these days that's really easy to do. You don't have to pay for 500 books to be printed. You can actually get it up on Amazon, on other sites. Bookstores can order it from there. And it's no longer stigmatized as you're such a bad writer, you had to publish it yourself. Yeah. I mean, 50 Shades of Grey, I'm sure one of your favorite books, was a self-published book originally. And that was one of the biggest selling, books of the last decade. So I made Particular Bear Publishing and got it out there.
So when did you start writing this? In your head, or did you...
After I did the trip, you're talking to people about it and people are saying, oh, that would be a interesting book. But there's so many travel books out there about, I did this crazy trip, I walked across here, or I rode across the Atlantic. So I was kind of reluctant to write something. And then a friend of mine said, well, you were basically having a very tempestuous relationship at the same time, and over the course of the trip, as I told them, you were kind of breaking up with your girlfriend. Isn't that an interesting angle to put in? And I thought, that is definitely more original, but I mean, it involves kind of exposing my personal life and putting it out there. And I started to write it, and it seemed to kind of work, this mix of, physical breakdowns with the bike and, emotional breakdowns in the relationship. And so, yeah, I mean, I put it out there. It is strange when you do that, because then, of course, the public can read it and people can write reviews on Amazon and so forth. And one of my favorite ones, I think, quite fortunate with the reviews, but one of my favorite ones is a guy who said, what an idiot for doing this journey. I mean, the guy is clearly unhinged. No wonder, his girlfriend didn't want to be with him. I was like, you don't even know me. But then gave me 4 stars, which I loved. If he's with all his vitriol, his finger slipped on the mouse. But yeah, that's the other, that's the flip side of it. It's been the same with the Yeti podcast and radio show that, you're putting your personal life out there. But I think people are these days a bit more up for that. A lot of shows these days have that kind of mental health angle or going a bit deeper, what makes us tick thing. So it's become a little bit more acceptable, thankfully.
Well, isn't that the alleged progression of everything? Into the personal.
Yeah, I guess that's where we're going, right? They're always. Yeah, so many shows now you watch and there is that angle. Like, we want to get into the back. What happened in your childhood? Come on. Like, it's a cooking show. No, we want to know what happened at school. Were you bullied? Yeah.
Right. You can't just talk about this.
You can't. Yeah.
Sinking Titanic. You have to talk about the people who died in it. So the wrong way around is a true story of.
It is a true story. Yeah.
Let's get this right. 6,000 kilometers.
Are you going to ask me in miles?
Hilarious and terrifying adventure as the odds become increasingly stacked against them making it to their destination. So, destination is, I'm not going to ruin the surprise, this isn't a reveal. Delhi to Rangoon or Yangon, and you have a map of it. And for those of you familiar with geography, Andrew will confound you by the path he's taken because, correct me if I'm wrong here, right? It goes India, stop 4, Nepal, 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe still Nepal. Maybe you've crossed over, maybe not. China, you're rubbing up against the border?
Up in Sikkim, which is this bit of India that just pokes up between Nepal and Bhutan,
And then Bhutan?
Bhutan,
And then close to China again, maybe, or not?
Northeast Indian states, very interesting part of the world,
Then you start, and in the meantime, you've come dangerously close to, or dangerous not because it's dangerous, but because there's a border, to the Bangladesh border before. So I went too quickly past Bangladesh. But you're at that latitude and longitude, just so folks know if they have better spatial orientation than I do. And then you just fly way off the trajectory, it seems, towards the northernmost top of Burma or Myanmar. But you stay in, do you stay in Bhutan then?
So it's, from Delhi, kind of, so across India, across the length of Nepal, a little bit more India, length of Bhutan, back into India, which shows you just how big India is, right? It's like you go to another country, you come out the other side, and India's still there.
Yeah.
And then we were restricted by where we could cross from India into Myanmar. Now that border crossing was closed at the time, I guess is now as well to foreigners. So yeah, I mean that was one of the crazy things. We didn't have permission to cross the border into Myanmar, kind of until we, literally until we got there, and it was, there were kind of messages going to the foreign ministry of Myanmar, would you let this weird guy and his partner, or possibly ex-partner by now, come across with a motorcycle, and it was all very complicated. So it was,
so
not an easy job.
So I've tried to describe it. You can take a look. It's in his book. I don't think it's online, but if you look, you say this is nonsense.
I should put the map online. You're right.
I don't know if you should.
It's not the straightest route as the crow flies.
It's just absurd.
Or the easiest way to go from Delhi to Myanmar, but I think it's the most interesting.
And so, you, by your own admission, are not a mechanic.
No.
And it sounds like you get a blowtorch and some rope and try and jerry-rig this thing into carrying more than it's designed to carry. So, what is this thing you get on? It has a personality and a life of its own, and so.
So, could I take you back to Aha,
yes.
the Norwegian popular music ensemble?
Take me on.
Take on Me. So that was their song. I remember watching the music video when I was a kid, and it was this little montage of a kind of sketched cartoon strip, and then which goes into real life. And there were guys on a motorcycle, on a classic motorcycle with the big round headlight, you know, the kind of old style that you'd kind of thing Steve McQueen would ride out of a prison camp on. And I thought this was fantastic. I loved this, but I thought I'm not brave enough or coordinated enough to ride a motorcycle. Years later, I wind up in India, and there's this thing called the Royal Enfield motorcycle, which looks exactly like, you know, the bike that Morten Harket would ride. My last name is Benfield, and I'm like, well, you know, Benfield on the Enfield. I mean, this is made to be. Yeah. So I finally took the plunge on my 30th birthday and bought one of these things, and terrified myself learning to ride it in Delhi. And I've ridden them ever since. So it's the Royal Enfield motorcycle. So it's made by the Enfield used to make guns actually in like First World War. The Lee Enfield rifle is theirs, I presume. And now these bikes are made in India. It's a fully Indian company, and this has a very distinctive kind of bum 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 sound. You know, it doesn't go super fast, but it is solid. Yeah. It is a tank. And importantly, everyone in South Asia knows how to repair them. I mean, there's no computer here. There's no, fancy suspension shocks. I mean, it's really, blowtorch, bit of rope and a hammer. You're good.
And so we'll move up to, you've made the decision to go on this trip, and you're going to Delhi, and you're doing it with a girlfriend at the time who has an interesting biography that you present. And you've done a ton of riding, but you've never done as long a trip as this. So this is the first time you're going through multiple border stops in areas that are, if not war-torn, have tensions.
Yeah, I mean, an ongoing Northeast India, ongoing conflict. I mean, there's, I think, in one state there were 20 different armed groups operating at that point. I mean, so many different acronyms, and it's almost Monty Python-esque. And not to demean the causes that anyone was fighting for, but you'd have the Bodo Liberation Front, and then the Liberation Front of Bodoland, and woe betide you to confuse these two things. And there were so many of them, it was quite hard to keep up.
But by your own recognition, you almost deserve to be robbed by driving into that area as a tourist, but as a tourist whose goal is very ill-defined.
Yeah, I mean, you stick out, right? First of all, and then when people say, "What are you doing?"
Going over there.
I'm driving. Why? Why don't you take a plane? Why are you taking this route as well?
No one has ever done this.
So so that can work in both ways. I mean, you can get amazing hospitality, but you can have a lot of suspicion. Yeah. Are you doing something nefarious? Are you a smuggler?
Of course.
Are you a spy? Or, straightforward, criminality or bad intentions from people seeing you as a target. Now, I mean, 95% of people were absolutely amazing. I mean, in the book, we wouldn't have made it more than a few hundred kilometers given my complete lack of mechanical ability. I mean, we were saved by people so many times, also given a bed to sleep in people's houses. I mean, this kind of thing. So, but there were also some scary moments as well where you kind of think, this could be, this could be it now.
You've never described scary moments. You obviously told us when you were worried, but and I wanted to acknowledge immediately when you said it, that this is a love story as well.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, and that you do show responses to your girlfriend that put you in the less favorable light. And it's really interesting because I was like, I wasn't expecting him to show that side of him, because as a dude, I'm like, don't give in. Like, what are you doing? Or, oh, gosh, you got to think you're an idiot, bro. But I thought, of course, you're 6,000 kilometers. You've dropped the bike on your head 5 times today. You're just obliterated today. And you go back and have, not a fist fight, but you have crosswords. And it was really interesting how at some point you just said, this is part of the narrative. And so as you're going through these various things on this Royal Enfield bike that is not designed for this. And by no stretch of the imagination was the manufacturer's warranty expected to extend to a 6,000-mile trip with a passenger on the back and about 200 pounds of gear that was just jerry-rigged, right? In containers and vessels. I even saw a wooden box in one photo. I was like, what in the hell do they got in there? Like a papyrus reed or something? But
yeah, I mean, it's the opposite of the long way round, the Ewan McGregor thing where, you've got a support team and the latest big off-road bikes. And I'm on a road bike and I'm in Northeast India. I'm in a literal quagmire. I mean, driving into trenches, mud trenches full of water, not knowing how deep they are, with, as you say, a massive bike and a passenger. And
and that was the that's why I raised
really
it. And I remembered seeing it and I didn't make the comparison someone else did when I told them I was reading this at Ewan, but yours was measuring hardcore is ridiculous. I mean, but yours was unassisted. And did you fall down on your bike? I mean, did you crash?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Repeatedly, right?
Yeah. I mean, none of them were high-speed crashes. So it was generally when, very off-road and again, I mean, not even a track, but driving through, a muddy swamp. And then when you go over, I mean, it's annoying and it's heavy to get the bike up, but you don't hurt yourself. The other was a stationary crash where I braked to avoid killing a dog and someone just smacked into the back of me. Yeah. Then an Enfield that's laden, excuse me, is an Enfield that's laden is quite good because just it's so solid. So it actually obliterated the guy's bike who came into the back of me, and I had a small dent in kind of one of the panniers on the back. So.
Yeah, you described that here. Yeah. But it's really, I mean, it's a horrifying experience going downhill on rocks, wet rocks, like you describe in those rainy nights. And you're just, your front tire is just out of control a lot of time, and you're just going down, and you got a passenger, and they have no idea. They can feel it, but they have no actual idea how.
Yeah. Absolutely, and all that weight that you can feel just wanting to run away with itself, on rocks, on gravel, also cobbles in some small towns in Nepal, cobbled, really steep cobbled streets through the town. And braking enough to slow down, but not too much, so you go into a skid, trying to get that balance right. And it's fairly scary,
So, I mean, you have at this point now significant motorcycle skills, just driving.
I've never had a formal lesson, but I guess so far I touch wood. I've never had an injury from coming off a bike. So
So braking at high speed, you done that?
I had one actually. I was coming down to the Myanmar-Thai border on the Myanmar side, and it was a kind of cross-country rough road on the bike, and there was a bit of tarmac, so I upped the speed, and I think again, something I had to avoid in the road, and I went into one of those wobbles, and you're overcompensating, and you're just going more and more. You go to the left, you correct it to the right, and you're like, I'm going over, and then I don't know if it's the Tai Chi or something, but somehow managed to save it, thankfully. So
so this non-athletic, unathletic boarding school boy out on his own. Didn't join the sports, does possibly one of the most ridiculous physical pursuits and avoids the ultimate destruction of a high-speed downhill crash off the side of a cliff. All this is developing simultaneously, sort of later than it should. I wouldn't say that, but, at a time where you're developing on the fly, probably a lot of these skills, balance, coordination, endurance.
I think, very much late developer, doing this trip. That was in my 30s, learning to ride a bike at 30, starting the meditation, also mid kind of 30s, not being brave enough to play a guitar and sing in public until my 40s. It's, I should have got, I'm 20, 30 years late with most of these things. Yeah.
Or not, but it's just interesting to see how this all comes together. So, I mean, I don't really get the idea that you thought you'd write a book about that trip. I just feel like you wanted to take the trip.
Yeah. I mean, it was only afterwards people saying, because you don't know what's going to happen on the trip. It could have all been plain sailing and very boring.
No, even if you do a 6,000 kilometer bike trip, you have a book.
Interesting.
Right?
It was only after coming back and then people saying you should write it. And then the clincher was, as I said, the friend saying, what about putting the relationship into the book to make it?
Yeah, and whether that makes it an even better book. And so it makes it a love story when it's not just a book about the love of your Royal Enfield.
Yeah.
It's just, and so it's a double love story, a triple love story. So it's feathered in nuance, and you even take shots at yourself through it. And I as I look at it, I thought, so the Roman Anton podcast, we do interview, we have a performance. I marked a page I was hoping you could read from, but in this I started to see, because I knew, because you had told me you were doing a Yeti series, and we'll explain what that is in a minute. There's a reference to maybe not how that got started, and maybe you were thinking about it at the time, but I thought, oh, that's funny. This is all now perfectly tying together in terms of...
Yeah, you see where it comes from.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, right, yeah.
Yeah, and so it is interesting, but, it's the commercial element is missing. I'm doing this to sell it is not present. And I was waiting to say, and I got, my money shot or whatever, just the whole thing. But it was just funny. And I was like, wow, this guy's crazy. He's just out for a 6,000-mile bike ride and thought, there wasn't the sponsor caravan going to meet him with supplies. There's the one night when you guys are on the road, 100, your estimations are always off by days. It's just comical sometimes.
Google Maps' estimations, I would say, yes, should not be trusted in Northeast India.
You'd rely on them. And you'd say to her, it's supposed to be 2 hours, and it's 11 hours later, and you're like 100 miles away. Yeah, pouring rain. That night's sleep is going to be the death of you two, right? You're just going to freeze to death, or you're going to be, some bandits are going to find you laying down and not fighting. Car comes by or not, or someone comes back. But some potentially near-death scenarios you get into, not through recklessness, but just through, dogged determination to do this with the information you had, which was dead wrong. Just the old dead reckoning didn't work out. Darn it.
Yeah.
And then now I'm in trouble. And with the bike just breaking down, you can't fix it.
You can't fix it. And even, it's interesting, I always say rely on local knowledge, but in some of those areas, most local people wouldn't even make the trips we were doing because the conditions were so bad. So they would tell you, wanting to be polite and give an answer, oh, that's 2 hours.
Yeah.
And it's 9, you know. So in the end, it was like you find a truck driver or someone who's actually doing this regularly.
And hope it translates, right? Hope it
translates. Yeah. I mean, driving at night on those roads in those areas is really crazy, and you'd never intentionally do it. But each time we did, it was like never again. But then, you see in the book, a few days later, here we go.
Yeah.
Andy's estimation is well off, and
and I think that's a great way to describe. Is you really you trust the people around you, and you know that you're not saying it's undeveloped or it's it's stupid, but when you're doing it the way you're doing it, it's just crazy because you've never done it. And so you see, oh, the traffic's dying down. Yeah, because people get off the road at this point, because after this point, it's now just ridiculously more difficult.
Yeah.
To the point of, if it's raining or something, you're on your own. You're in a part of the world that's so remote that no one's going to come by to help you. And the people who do come by to help may have other ideas.
That's the fear. I mean, it did happen several times, in a village or something, and people would always help. But it's really like, sun is going down. No one's coming up this mountain road again until morning. Right. It's going to be a sub-zero temperature. We've not got sleeping bags. We're really screwed here. I mean, that was scary. And one of the funniest ones, though, was this road in Nepal. Beautiful tarmac, beautiful views, no traffic on it. And we were just like, wow, really hit gold today. This is perfect. And then realize why a few kilometers later, because they hadn't finished the thing. And it just, it ended. And it was kind of like a dried riverbed. And so the next 5 hours were kind of on that. But, people had said, oh, yeah, there's a lovely new road. I mean, just nobody had mentioned it's not.
It hasn't gone yet.
It doesn't, it's not actually completed.
Yeah, and so I want to yell at you, like dumb author, but it's just that's how it happened, right?
Yeah.
And who wouldn't take the tarmac after going down a rock chute for 10 days? It's just very funny. So I mean, it's well done. I mean, writing a book after the fact that wasn't meant to be written, and then making it something that's universal. I really enjoyed reading it.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, and so. Anything you want to say about this? Anything you think I missed out or I could have done better in queuing this up?
Yeah, I think what I try to do is blend, there is the travelogue of our adventures. There is the kind of relationship, as you said, the self-reflective thing, but also to give people an insight to the cultures and the places a bit as well, without making it too dry. So, I mean, that's what I've tried to do. I've also, before this book, I mean, I lived in Nepal, I traveled in India, so I know the areas fairly well. And yeah, I guess that was my mission, to make something that's fun, that's funny, but also a little bit educational and a little bit, self-reflective. Yeah, for anyone who's, thinking to do such a trip, read this book first and then book a holiday to Spain instead.
Right.
Much more fun.
Yeah, The Wrong Way Around by Andrew Benfield, available online. I think you're on Amazon. And
yeah.
And if you're in Bangkok and you want to go to the Foreign Correspondence Club, they have it. You're one of the authors.
Kinokuniya has it, yeah.
And I think you have some outlets in Singapore as well. So we have you here, so that's cool that we can get to your stuff here. So we start to get through meditation, Tai Chi, adventures. The website also has some of your sort of short form writings, right. I thought. One that was of note to me, and I thought I'd heard about this person before. Very strange. It's one of the short stories. God, my organization is so horrendous for this one. I had a little yellow sticky and everything.
I hope that whole book is not all about me.
That would be
kind of creepy.
This one's about office chair allocation in the office. So that's, no reservations. A step up good shrine.
A slap up good shrine.
A slap up.
Yeah.
Everyone has a little book in them. So, happy beginnings. A slap up good shrine. Yeah, some really interesting, shorter travel writing discussions that I think really get eclipsed by the Yeti series. I mean, I think we could go through those, and I think you should. So I would say, if you want to figure out if you like this guy outside of the podcast, look at his short writings. But the Yeti series is a 10-part series, and if I'm calling it wrong, let's get that name corrected right here, dude.
Yeah, it's just called Yeti.
Yeti. All right, so Yeti, it's on BBC Sound.
Yeah, BBC Sounds and Spotify, Apple Podcasts.
Yeah.
Main platforms. Yeah.
So,
but it's a BBC production, yeah.
Yeah, BBC production. So that's capital B, capital C. So that's the British Broadcast Company.
British Broadcasting Corporation.
Corporation. So if folks don't know the BBC, because sometimes that.
How can anyone not know the BBC? I would be shocked and insulted.
Well, it's funny because I was in Tokyo 2 weeks ago, and that was the channel, the first channel that came up. CNN wasn't an option, and so it's funny how that I mean the packages that get offered.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And so
CNN.
Right, and sometimes Al Jazeera is first or second, or sometimes CCTV is moving up. I've noticed now.
Yeah,
so
So
BBC, obviously, even a big fan of the various songs and publications and things they have. But BBC Sounds, and so that came out recently.
Yeah, it came out a couple of weeks ago. Yeah.
Yeah, and so when we talk about that. I noticed this. I was wondering if we could go out of order here, and since we're going to do this, I'm looking at page 183, I think, of the book. I gratefully took the book she handed me.
We're in Bhutan. Okay.
Yeah, right. Good. To maybe through the next page. Would you mind reading a little bit from this?
Yeah.
Do you need a break, or do you want to?
No,
yeah.
Let's do it.
So, Frank, this is going to be the performance piece. We're just going to let it blend together. But I gratefully took the book she handed me. So this is from the wrong way around to set up what is one of the more fun and interesting long play docuseries. What do you call that?
Yeah, I guess it's interesting actually. On the BBC website, they put it in documentaries, but also like life stories. So it's and it's also in science as well. Like
right.
so we were like, oh, we're quite interdisciplinary now. I mean, it's a strange one because it is
10 episodes.
It's 10 episodes. We are looking for a creature, so in that way, it's a scientific expedition, but it's also a personal kind of thing, and it's a travel log, and it's an adventure, and it's about all the stuff that happens to us. So it's a bit like my book. I think it's a bit of a mishmash of different kind of genres. Yeah.
So you're setting up your next mishmash, and I was
setting up my next mishmash. Yes.
I gratefully is where I was hoping you could read from us. So. Okay. This is the performance piece. So, cool performance piece on Roman Anton podcast with Andrew Benfield. Here it comes right now.
I gratefully took the book she handed me and looked down at the title, curious to see if I was dealing with a writer of romantic novels, political treatises. I wrote this and I can't pronounce it. Political treatises or geological textbooks. I broke out into a big smile as I read the words Bhutanese Tales of the Yeti on the cover. It was a collection of villagers' stories of encounters with the legendary abominable snowman that she had gathered together over the years from across the country and then lovingly edited. I really couldn't think of a more apt gift to receive in a hidden Himalayan valley. I admit that, much to the amusement of Lady R, I had developed something of a fascination with the legend of the Yeti since we started planning the trip. Anyone who has not spent some time in the Himalayas would understandably dismiss stories of a big, hairy man-bear roaming this... Sorry. Excuse me. Anyone who has not spent some time in the Himalayas would understandably dismiss stories of a big, hairy man-bear roaming the snowbound mountains as a villager's fairy tale or a traveller's yarn. Certainly not something to be taken in any way seriously. But on closer examination, I found there was rather more to it. Way back in the 1st century AD, the Roman military commander and natural historian Pliny the Elder had written, in a break from pontificating about elephants, obviously, of an immensely strong man-like animal that could be found in the remote mountains of India and that walked on 2 legs. Chinese manuscripts from the 7th century similarly tell of large, hairy bipeds living in the lands of the snows. Paintings of tall ape-like creatures dating back several centuries adorn the walls of caves and monasteries at a number of sites across Bhutan, Nepal and Tibet. In the 19th century, the first accounts started to emerge from Western explorers of encountering a Yeti-like creature, and by the 1950s, the UK's Daily Mail newspaper was funding a dedicated snowman expedition to the Himalayas. That was followed by a series of American missions, with the US government advising their participants they should not harm any Yetis they found unless it was strictly necessary for self-defense. The list of notable mountaineers who have claimed a Yeti sighting is long and distinguished, topped by no less than Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay, the first men to summit Everest. Many Sherpas with extensive mountaineering experience also claim the Yeti's existence as fact, and a whole host of communities in the Himalayan region, living hundreds of miles apart and having no contact with one another, have their own word for a kind of snow bear or wild man that they live in fear of and say is found only in the highest reaches of the mountains. In Bhutan, the belief seemed to extend right up to the highest levels of government, given the ministerial approval that was granted in 2001 to create the Sakteng Wildlife Sanctuary in the far east of the country, a 250 square mile area created especially to protect the natural habitat of the Yeti. So could there be any plausible scientific basis for all these stories and sightings? I discovered that in 2004, the editor of the prestigious scientific journal Nature had given a tantalizing maybe. He wrote that given the recent discovery of Homo floresiensis, a previously unknown diminutive cousin of modern humankind that roamed the earth until about 12,000 years ago, tales of other human-like creatures surviving in remote areas were definitely worthy of investigation. And one has to bear in mind just how remote and largely uninhabited most of the Himalayas is, making it quite feasible that an unknown species, perhaps just a distant cousin of the polar bear that has taken to walking on its hind legs on occasion, could remain undetected. After all, it was only just 100 years ago that fantastical legends of an enormous hairy beast that roamed the Central African jungles were, to the shock of scientists, found to be true when the Berlin Natural History Museum received a special delivery from a German soldier in the Congo, the body of a mountain gorilla he'd just shot.
Yeah, I mean, really interesting. And so maybe that was a thought you had contemporaneously, but you got the book, or you read the book, right? And so, you okay? You need a...
Yeah, I'll just take a sip of water. Sorry.
So you read the book on that trip.
Yeah.
And so you weren't planning to write about that, but you reconstructed that narrative after the fact, probably a little bit. And so now you're making this movie. Is it when did you say I'm going to do a Yeti series? I mean, how does that happen? Because now you've shown, okay, you're not whimsical or fickle, but when you get the hook in your mouth, you're going for it.
In Bhutan, getting that book was interesting. Then I got another book from someone, which was a story of that 1950s Daily Mail, the British newspaper expedition to look for the Yeti. They didn't find a Yeti, so it was kind of, died down. But when they were researching it, they found so many locally consistent stories of this animal. And that was striking for me. And there seemed to be a thing like, if no foreigner has seen it, it can't exist. And I was kind of like, what about all the local stories? Getting the book from Kunzang, same thing. And then I saw an interview with David Attenborough when he was asked, do you think there's any other big undiscovered creatures around? And he said, I really think there's something to this Yeti thing.
Yeah.
And at that point, David Attenborough, if you've got him at your back, I kind of thought, okay, I'm going to go and see if there are still first-hand stories in the Himalayas of this thing. So I went up, I had a look and got some interesting stories, and then decided to take a friend with me who's much smarter and more skeptical, just to keep me on the straight and narrow. And then, we started posting some stuff about it, and long story short, before that, the Royal Geographical Society in London were having an evening with talks where you could apply to talk. So I, for a laugh, applied to talk about the Yeti, and they said yes. And I mean, to put this in context, this is a veritable old English institution that hosted Sir Edmund Hillary talking about Everest, Shackleton on Antarctica, Livingstone on Africa, and then they got Benfield on the Yeti last year. That got a bit more interest, and then the BBC got in touch and said, like, how about a podcast and radio show about this? And you think, can this be happening? But yeah, sure, why not?
Yeah, I mean, that was a great, that Royal Geographic Society clip. I forgot where you posted or how I read it. I thought it was off of your website.
Yeah,
but maybe
it's on the website, yeah.
Really interesting to watch, and I thought, Frank, we okay? We need to change anything? All right. We do that, so don't.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, so I watched that. I saw the piece, but it was really interesting. So how long from start to finish is I kept wondering, because I sort of knew when the book ended or when that was done and dusted. When do you start? Is the Royal Geographic Society the beginning?
No, so some friends of mine did something called the Last Overland, where they drove a 50-year-old Land Rover from Singapore to London a few years ago.
Awesome.
And which is great, the TV series out on it now. So I was accompanying them for just the Asian kind of leg of the trip. And we were up in northeast India, and they were off doing something. I had a couple of days free. So then I just drove my bike up towards the Chinese border and started asking about Yetis. And got a few interesting stories, but then people said, northeast India is really the place to go. Arunachal Pradesh, the state up there. So that was then 2019, and I took my friend along, Richard. We did that together on motorbikes. And then a few months later, we were back in Myanmar, went up to the north there. Then there was a kind of hiatus of a couple of years, COVID, blah, blah, blah. And then it was 2021. I went out to Nepal, Everest region. And then just last December, we went to Bhutan. So it was spaced out
December.
Over 3 kind of years.
Wow.
Yeah. And
2022.
Yeah. So that was by that time we'd had, the BBC had been in touch, and they said, where do you want to go for a final trip? We've got all your stuff from before. It's great. But we thought, Bhutan is the place to go because there is this wildlife sanctuary dedicated to protect the natural habitat of the Yeti. come on, that's the place to go.
So the footage you took from before the hiatus is several years old.
So Arunachal Pradesh in India, that was 2019.
Interesting.
And then, so I'm posting up in line with the radio broadcast schedule in the UK at the moment each week on my Instagram and Twitter. And so it gets, the footage at the moment is not the best quality, but once we get to the Nepal trip, then I actually hired a professional cameraman to come around with me and film it, because we'd had some interest at that point about making a film, which we'd still love to do of it. So we thought we'll get some footage there. It gets progressively better also because they keep, updating the iPhone models, which is what we were using in film. So,
Right, Mr. Fancy, Mr. Fancy Pants.
It's not they had a whole crew. I mean, it was just with my phone.
Right, there's the one back up to the edge moment, right, where you almost go off the edge of the cliff.
Yeah, there's a couple. I mean, there's that funny thing when you're doing, I'd never done it before, learning how to do pieces to camera and stuff and be filmed. You tend to disregard everything else around you because you're so focused on what you're saying and, trying not to look like an idiot. There's a couple of times I nearly kind of backed myself off a large cliff.
Well, and the nature of where you were was cliffy, right?
It was quite a cliffy area and not a lot of kind of, fences or, kind of.
So your 10-part documentary, Yeti, is In Search of the Yeti.
Yeah.
And you started it, at least in your head and on film, 2019-ish, and then had a hiatus where the world stopped. We all know that. It would have been imprudent and illegal to have traveled for parts of that. And then you got back on the horse a little later and started to follow up with this, and then your friends went through and you were able to go to some other remote areas. And you finished content capturing in December of last year, or maybe a little later, and then you wrote the text and did other things to get this going. It was really fun listening to. I sort of am so used to listening to podcasts now in the car in the Bangkok traffic. I don't know, you guys don't get that luxury in Singapore because you've got 9 minutes from wherever you're going to wherever you are. And so I spend hours in the car listening to long length material. So this was perfect to go through in the car. It sounds great, and it's just edited very enjoyably. And I thought, part of this is there's an art to doing these and adding sound effects and sort of making visual the audio. So footsteps or bird chirping or things, and they may or may not be from the sound booth, but really interesting to listen to, so it was three-dimensional listening. I could hear and sound, and the number of times you and we should mention him by name, your partner.
Richard,
I think you got sick more than he did, and sort of, the number of sort of times you're out eating or in tents, and the diaries you talk about capturing. It's a very interesting listen.
Very good to hear.
So how did you pick? Did you have a say once you decided to align with the dark side of BBC and go with the mega corporation?
So when they came to us, I think thankfully they realized it wasn't just us looking for the Yeti. There was this thing about, it was the way we were doing it, right? And it wouldn't have been interesting for them to just, that's been done before. It's a couple of guys looking for the Yeti. It was like, we're not going to find a live Yeti. We're not going up with heat-seeking cameras and a lot of heavy voiceovers.
Right.
We think the local people who live there are lucky to see one in a lifetime, but we should take their stories more seriously, and hopefully one of them will lead us to some evidence. So that was one spin. And the second spin they liked was the dynamic between Richard and I. We're good friends, we have good banter, but I'm a little bit more the crazy one, he's a little bit more the serious one. And as far as Yetis go, I'm the kind of believer, he's the skeptic. So they liked that. Of course, until... everything can be done in the edit. So there was this kind of feel like, oh my goodness, is it going to come out? And they will it'll be a documentary about two guys having a midlife crisis, and make us out to be very ridiculous. But no, they really kind of stuck to, I think we're very authentic with what we were doing. The amount of work that goes into it for what you like, this sound design, I had no idea about this stuff. I mean, these guys, there's a whole team of them putting this stuff together. I mean, we're out in Bhutan with, this professional recording equipment, recording a nomad's footsteps or recording a yak bell or whatever. that's actually the easy bit. It's putting all that together and then packaging it. It's one thing in a book where you've got a little bit of leeway on how long it is and whatever. I mean, they're like, you've got a slot. It's 28 minutes. We need 10 episodes. Each needs to be, 28 minutes long. Putting that all together and getting the balance of story, of narration, and that huge challenge of this is a very visual subject. This is the Himalayas. This is amazingly interesting places and people that are all visual. And we were like, how are you going to get that across in a podcast? And of course, you can't do that entirely. But I think a number of people have said you do get a nice feeling that you're almost kind of transported there.
Yeah, it's funny because I felt like you let me down when I turned my phone sideways on the dash and set it on my car, while I was driving probably, which I apologize. And it was audio. I was like, oh, Andrew.
Yeah.
But then I started listening. I thought, oh, this reminds me of This American Life and a lot of the pre-podcast radio shows that I loved for a long time, even Garrison Keillor. You never had film or video of that.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's BBC counterparts that I don't know because I wasn't there, but it really, I think, even makes it easier to listen to than had I had video and would have had the grandeur or the expectations of that description of the two Western climbers that saw in the Everest climb or the Annapurna climb. He was the entity was that far away, and it's just that was a riveting moment. And I'm not trying to ruin it, something that's coming out, but I was listening to that and thought, oh, that's great. I don't need to see anything there. The way this is being described is such an interesting thing because it's about the Yeti, and I don't need to have video with this, and it really sort of helped form my view of the narrative of this thing. So I think you're sort of treating me as an equal in understanding editing of that nature, and I'm not. I mean, I imagine it was a learning for you, and I imagine you're way out ahead of us in terms of how to put these shows together now, having done this 10 series.
There was a producer and there were a lot of professional people. I just went looking for Yetis and then did some voiceover stuff afterwards where, and then you discuss exactly what you're gonna say. But actually, a lot of people have come and said, we'd love to see that footprint you discuss. Have you got the photos? So we're now posting on Instagram and Twitter kind of daily the accompanying visuals. So it is a podcast, but you get a kind of a free long form movie over the next 10 weeks as it's being broadcast in the UK on social media. And we'd love to turn it into a documentary as well, a visual documentary. But you're right. I mean, when it's a podcast, you have that pressure to have a really tight narrative. You can get away with a lot more when you got film because, oh, look, viewer, there's some beautiful mountains and we're just having some tea. You can't do that on a podcast. There's got to be more, more meat in it, I think.
Yeah. But it was really interesting file. So 10 episodes. You go take a look at it. It's as Andrew mentioned. It's on
free.
On Spotify. It's on Apple
Podcast,
some others.
Sites.
I'm not going to talk about what your next steps are, but it's really interesting tracking you on Particular Bear. So if you're watching this, go follow Particular Bear and go back in the history a little bit, at least until June. You can go back further on his stuff and check his stuff out because it's all sort of crazy. But this has good footage that goes along with what he's talking about, and so if you want to do that, but. Sort of very modern approach to releasing some art form here, right? I mean, this isn't what you and I were trained to do, is sort of write it down and get it bound, and now you're out in this.
Yeah, I mean, I joined Twitter in 2009, never used it, and reactivated the account last week. And, I'm like, it's like giving my mother a mobile phone, I'm complete. Where do you click? How do you, what's appropriate to write in a tweet, whatever? How do you retweet? And I'm like, are people just, because there's also some people at the BBC that are tweeting it. People are looking at this stuff and you don't kind of want to, mess it up. But yeah, so far, no one told me I'm doing it wrong. I think the tweets are going out there. But yeah, absolutely. You're like, well, how do people consume this stuff these days, right? And when they first came with the podcast, I was like, oh, do people listen to podcasts? Apparently a lot of people do. And I don't, to be honest. I've started now. But it's like, yeah, if that's what people want and that's going to get the story out there and they'll enjoy it, great. And I mean, I never thought I would then like be tweeting, video clips of trips and stuff and have a lot of strangers, very nice strangers, getting in touch and saying, yeah, you've inspired us, or this is interesting. So it's weird. I mean, we're thinking to do a book of Yeti as well, because I think it's, having done the podcast, it would be nice to do a book where we go into a bit more depth. And there's a lot of other stories we couldn't include, because again, a book, you can be 200 pages, 250, it's fine. The podcast was like, you've got 10 episodes, it's 28 minutes. So there's a lot of stuff that's cut out. So,
geez, I mean, it's spin-off central though. When I think about some of the areas you went to in Myanmar, those are not, they're the road less traveled, right? I mean, a lot of this is sort of first-time exposure. If you're even if you're familiar to the region, we all been to Inlay Lake, or you can be snobby and say, I've been there, but it's a lot of places you're sort of glossing over, which have, even your short stays are awesome storylines. So you're sort of getting used to the exceptional. So, it's just really, it was impressive going through this. So not to take away too much from that, 10 series, you can go out and find it. More to follow. Very cool idea. I don't know if you want to talk about that or not, but I can leave it at that. And so I'm going to get back to meditation, Tai Chi, Yeti, adventures, the book. And we've covered it. I did want to point out there were really two women. There was Emma Slade, and then we've already mentioned, or I've mentioned, and you've followed me along, as Kunzang Chodin.
Kunzang Chodin, yeah.
Who just really had beautiful sort of voices and narratives.
Yes, exactly. Both beautiful voices and the narrative. They're charismatic, and they also had something really interesting and moving to say. And that combination is very powerful.
It was just show-stopping for me. I was
good, because it was, when I was there, it was exactly what I felt. This has stopped me in my tracks.
Just and you just say, don't fall for the, or the cynic in me, which is, I think it's all there is. But I was like, wow, how excellent. And I replayed that. And when you came in here to the office, I was playing, just going back and looking for some of the live footage of voices that you had. Some were characters, but these two were sort of mystic oracles that were speaking. Just what a great miniseries of her own. I keep looking at it because I don't want to mispronounce it. Kunzang Chodin,
yeah.
Kunzang Chodin, a world-renowned, renowned author of her own right.
Yeah, she's an author, speaker, cultural custodian. I mean, one of these Renaissance people that just makes you think you've done nothing with your life when you meet them. You're like, you're doing all this stuff. And just a charming, humble, and very funny, cheeky person as well. Just, your ideal dinner guest, I would say. Yeah.
And you met her incidentally, or was she a high point that you had to meet?
I knew her when I traveled through and wrote the book. So that's the lady who gave me the Yeti book back in the day when I did the motorcycle trip. Right. And that time, someone had just mentioned her, and I was in the area where I knew her house was, and she has this old house that's also a museum, and you can go there. So I went up to meet her, and and in the podcast we cover it. She also was sent away to boarding school like I was, but it's always when you with trips as well, you think you're doing something extreme, and then you meet someone else who's actually, taking it to a whole nother level. So my boarding school experience was tough. She was sent away at, I think, 9, and it was a 10-day journey on horseback to get to a boarding school in India, because there were no motorable roads back then, to a school where no one spoke Bhutanese and she didn't speak English. I mean, that's tough. I was like, okay, I don't have boarding school syndrome then. That's a whole different.
You have UK boarding school syndrome.
Yeah,
she has that, and she also rode a horse. I mean, so maybe she didn't consider it a syndrome, and maybe
it was interesting talking about it. Yeah, and then the effect it had on her, which was to bring her closer to her home country, to Bhutan, and want to come back and conserve the culture and history. Whereas for me, it had a bit the opposite of effect of like, let's get out of this place now.
but I have heard you do no disparaging of the motherland. You know, I mean, it's not like you guys ended up falling far from the tree. And in fact, you're holding up that long esteemed custom of Englishmen who go out and write words in other countries.
I mean, the irony, is that running away from that British establishment with Yeti, I've come back to, the two very bastions. One is the Royal Geographical Society, and I was looking out at the audience as I was giving my speech about looking for the Yeti, thinking, these people are they're probably the ones who bullied me back in boarding school sitting here, that kind of, very over-educated, double-barreled names and so forth. And then being on the BBC. And funnily enough, actually, some names popped up, new followers on Instagram, and it just rang this very vague bell. And I looked, it was like, oh my God, that's someone I shared a dormitory with,
Stinky.
I've not heard from. Yeah, exactly. And like, oh, do I block them? Or, well, they haven't messaged me, they're just following, so it's okay. But it was really like this, oh, what have I done? I've taken myself back there. So, yeah.
Well, look, I mean, you're a master martial artist in addition to a trained meditator through a United States training program, for God's sake, so legitimized there. And you've traveled the world, and you've owned property in Bali, and now you've put together some packages that are quite admirable. So
they're not going to bully me anymore. Okay.
Yeah, there you go. You can't. Just pick you up in their Ferrari, though. But well, good. So I asked you if there's anything else. I mentioned those two women in particular, but it really personalized the story for me because both of them made me really reevaluate some of the prejudices and just idiotic thoughts I have about some of the Thai folks, and how their spirituality relates to their daily life and vice versa. And my knee-jerk reaction to the spiritual, which is sort of offensive and crude as opposed to welcoming and warm, and the way they describe the Yeti as a spiritual idea as well, and a well-needed one. And if the handler of that spiritual information treats it negatively, then that idea might well treat them negatively. And these were such complex ideas they were making so simple, and I didn't do it. I think I just did a horrible job of summarizing it, but they both did. And so I've gone back to listen to it to say, hey, wow, if you're a businessman like Andrew coming into Hong Kong to sell goods or to promote regionality and write reports, and you understand these things or you've heard them from someone, it's eye-opening. It impacts the way you write reports. It impacts the way you treat people and interact with people. It interacts everything you're doing. And so if you happen to be the Forex trader, maybe it's irrelevant to you, but you can understand why the Forex market of that country may be less worried about a bank holiday than your average banker, or may declare a holiday for 2 days for no apparent reason and sort of throw the Forex exchange off a little bit. It's such an excellent thing to hear, because I need it repeated to me a lot to keep me from being such an idiot, just with my own biases. Those two ladies alone, listening for them was just spectacular. And I was in the car, in Bangkok, just sort of probably about to get an accident. That's my thrill seeking there is getting on Rama 4 and not paying attention. But thanks for that. I mean, it was well worth listening. It was very cool. And so I'm glad I'm not glad you were hurt, but I'm glad there was a delay here because it gave me more time to understand. And so maybe all this was meant to be for me, but I want to thank you. Was there anything else you wanted to talk about today, or anything else you're working on, or any ideas you want to sow some seeds on?
No, I mean, we're pretty much full Yeti at the moment. We're in the UK National Press next week. We're on the BBC's website in a few days as well. So it's a lot of promotional stuff going on for that. I just published a piece in Nikkei Asia about flight shaming. This
I saw that
in Europe where we take the train instead of the plane, and I thought, well, let's give it a go to get from Bangkok to Singapore, which should be a 2-hour flight, and it took me 2.5 days on the train, but it was fantastic. So some reflections on that. But yeah, that's pretty much that's pretty much it. I think we've done the most thorough, kind of exposition of my life I could ever wish to have. So I'm gonna go and ruminate about this and what it means afterwards. There's almost a narrative there that's coherent, I think. But I now see what's going to happen, that I'm going to in another year say, no, what I actually want to be doing is this other thing, but I don't know what that's going to be. So
I think there's an entirely coherent narrative. I mean, to me, and I think, you're acknowledging to us live with these folks how damaging a failure of certain findings was to you mentally and your response to it, like with the wrong way around. And in the context of, the early disruptions with the boarding schools, it's a resilience, and then you're learning the martial art. There's a very interesting narrative there. I mean, it's an expose of a very solid person to me, and it with you revealing faults or what I consider to be less than flattering details about yourself so willingly to invoke a tighter narrative. I thought, this is awesome. It was very cool. So, on behalf of those who listen and read, thanks. It's fun, and I appreciate your coming in today. I know I caught you probably at the most busy week of your recent life, but normally we would go out and go somewhere. Frank and I are going to go down the street to the Benjasiri Park because I know you're a physical guy, and I know at night they do the group dance at the back of that park, and they'll have 800 to 1,000 people doing the
800 to 1,000 people. Wow.
Yeah, it's the dance to the and then there's like the boombox master, and she.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's sort of a variation of that collective Tai Chi, but at its extreme. And then they have the wicker ball kicking game back there.
Okay.
And, which Frank used to do until he became a bass player, and he couldn't afford to break his wrist every weekend. But so we have a scheduling conflict, so you won't join us on that. But
unfortunately not, no.
Yeah, but we got you to read, and I appreciate that.
My
so
pleasure.
I feel like mission accomplished, and
Absolutely,
I want to thank you for coming in today. So it's been a pleasure to get to meet you.
Great to be here. Thank you so much.
All right, thanks. Bye. All right.
Lovely.
Yeah, hopefully that wasn't too long. I think we agreed to an hour.
Very, very thorough. My goodness.
How long was that, Frank? 2 hours. I stole an hour from him. Good. Yeah.
Oh, my ears are full.
Okay, I'm here at Benjasiri Park in Bangkok, Thailand. It's middle of the day, so the park is sort of empty. We just had an interview with Andrew, and he had to leave. So for the first time, we're doing this without the guest. This park is right in the middle of the city. Got the Emporium Mall, M. Courtier Mall. We got the Marriott. I don't know what they call it, the Marriott Marquis. It used to be the Queen's Park. But this place in the evening and on weekends is packed, and they have so much stuff going on in here. You got basketball court here, pickup game. They got that, what's that game you kick with the ball? Sepak takraw, I think I'm saying that wrong. They got aerobics here, which is wild. They got about 100, 200, 300 people come out, 1,000 people, and dance to aerobics. They got these stationary outside exercise spots that are pretty wild too. But this park really gets ripped up at night. A lot of people in it. There's some kids playing out there now, some basketball getting ready. It's about noon, so it's hot. It's really hot right now. But very cool park, right in the middle of the city. If you get a chance, or if you're staying at one of the nearby hotels, it's great for morning exercise, afternoon exercise. You come in off the trafficy street, and you can get in here and you can jog around the park. It's very cool. I used to live next door to this, and so I used to come here all the time. But that's about all I got on this one. So we learned about the Yeti today. We learned about driving a motorcycle throughout Asia, and we learned a lot more from Andrew. And I was glad he got to read for us. So let's conclude this podcast, and I'll say goodbye now. Take it easy. 1, 2, 3, quiet.